The Bitter Harvest, Chapter 1, The Taste of Sorrow. The morning, it arrived, with a familiar ache. Eleanor Vance, 70 years of age, stood amidst the ancient vines of her Napa Valley vineyard. The sun, a golden promise, kissed the dew-kissed leaves, but Eleanor felt only a pervasive chill. The vineyard, her life's work, her family's legacy, felt heavy, burdened. Her grandson, Daniel Vance, 40 years old, a brilliant but relentlessly pragmatic enologist, stood beside her. He held a small glass, swirling the deep crimson liquid within. He sniffed it, tasted it, his brow furrowed. "It's still here, Grandma," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "The bitterness, it's even stronger this year. These old Zinfandel vines, they're producing a truly unpalatable yield." Eleanor nodded, her gaze drifting to the specific rows he referenced. The oldest vines on the property, the ones that had been here for generations, the ones that grew over the very spot where Rosemary, her daughter, Daniel's mother, vanished in the 1980s, just gone from this very vineyard, a ghost in the sun-drenched rows. Her absence was a wound that had never truly healed, a constant aching throb in Eleanor's heart. "It's the sorrow of the earth, Daniel," Eleanor murmured, her voice soft, carrying the weight of years. "The land remembers. It weeps for what was lost." Daniel sighed, a sound of polite exasperation. "Grandma, with all due respect, it's not sorrow. It's a soil deficiency, or a specific pest. Or, more likely, these vines are simply past their prime. It's time to pull them, replant, modernize." "Replant?" Eleanor turned to him, her eyes sharp. "These vines are the heart of this vineyard. They were here before any of us. They hold the deepest roots." "They're unprofitable, Grandma," Daniel countered, his tone firm. "And frankly, they're dragging down the quality of the rest of the harvest. We need to be rational about this." Their arguments had been endless since he arrived. Daniel, with his spreadsheets and scientific data, and Eleanor, with her intuition and belief in the land's spirit. Two worlds colliding. "Rosemary believed in the spirit of this land, Daniel," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "She told me, just weeks before she left, that she had left me a last message. In a bottle of wine, from these very vines, a special vintage, she called it, but I could never find it." Daniel stared at her. A message in a bottle of bitter wine? It was the most nonsensical thing he'd heard. His mother had been ethereal, dreamy, but even she wouldn't leave such a bizarre, untraceable clue. "Grandma, that's highly unlikely," he said gently. "She probably meant it metaphorically, or it was a child's fancy." "She was a young woman, Daniel," Eleanor corrected him, a hint of steel in her voice. "And she was serious. She said it would be the vintage that whispers, and these vines, they are whispering bitterness." Daniel knew it was futile to argue, but the idea, as absurd as it was, intrigued him. A message from his mother. He had so few memories of her, just fleeting glimpses, like sunbeams through leaves. He wanted to understand her, to understand the woman who had captivated his father, then vanished. "All right, Grandma," he conceded, surprising himself. "Tell me about this special vintage. What year? What was unique about it, besides its supposed bitterness?" Eleanor's eyes softened, a faint flicker of hope igniting in their depths. It was the '84 harvest, a difficult year, but Rosemary insisted on those old Zinfandel grapes. She said they had a story to tell. She bottled it herself. in a very specific, dark green bottle. She kept it in the deepest part of the cellar, the sleeping cellar. She called it the sleeping cellar. Daniel knew the place. A long-abandoned section of the vast underground cellars, sealed off decades ago. Forgotten, untouched. Maybe, just maybe. Chapter 2, The Earth's Scar. Daniel, despite his skepticism, felt a reluctant pull. A message from his mother. A chance to connect with a phantom. He spent days in the old cavernous cellars beneath the winery. The air was cool, damp, smelling of aged oak and centuries of fermentation. He systematically explored every alcove, every dusty rack. He consulted old maps of the winery, digital and paper, searching for any mention of a sleeping cellar. He found it, eventually. A section walled off with rough, unmortared stone, not on any modern blueprints. It was deep, dark, barely accessible. He used his phone's flashlight, cutting through the oppressive gloom. The walls were rough-hewn rock, and then he saw them. Faint, almost invisible markings, scratched into the stone. Not numbers, not names. Strange symbols, swirls, lines, intersecting patterns. Primitive, ancient. He frowned. These weren't the usual chalk marks of a vintner. They looked intentional, ceremonial almost. He took photos, detailed and precise, for later analysis. The search for the bottle was fruitless. The sleeping cellar was empty, save for dust and cobwebs. He felt a familiar disappointment settling in. Just as he'd expected. Another one of Grandma's whimsical notions. Yet, the bitterness of the Zinfandel haunted him. He couldn't shake the correlation. Rosemary's disappearance, the peculiar taste, the strange symbols. His scientific mind insisted on a logical explanation, but the emotional void left by his mother's absence urged him to dig deeper. He decided to employ a new approach. If the bitterness was linked to the earth, he would scan the earth. He deployed his drone, a sophisticated piece of equipment usually used for vineyard management and yield predictions. He fitted it with a thermal imaging camera. He would map the heat signatures of the ancient Zinfandel plot, find anomalies, identify potential soil problems. The drone hummed to life, rising silently above the vineyard. Daniel watched the screen, a real-time thermal map of the land. Most of the vineyard showed a uniform, healthy temperature. But as the drone passed over the oldest Zinfandel rows, a distinct anomaly appeared, a patch of significantly lower temperature, a cold spot, right in the middle of the area where Rosemary had last been seen. He frowned. Too cold for normal soil conditions. Too distinct. It was like a scar on the Earth's thermal signature. He immediately drove to the spot. The vines here were gnarled, ancient. He felt a strange chill despite the warm California sun. He knelt, pressing his hand to the earth. It felt cool, colder than the surrounding soil. He pulled out a small, portable ground-penetrating radar unit from his truck. He ran it over the cold spot. The screen showed a dense subsurface anomaly, a solid mass, not natural rock, something buried, a structure, man-made. His heart began to pound. Not a pest, not soil deficiency, something else, something hidden beneath the very ground his family had farmed for generations. He called Eleanor. His voice, usually so controlled, was edged with excitement. "Grandma, I found something. Under the vines, a structure. It's deep." Eleanor listened, her breath catching. Under the vines, near where Rosemary, her voice trailed off. A lifetime of unspoken questions hung in the air. "Yes, Grandma," Daniel confirmed, his voice hushed. I think this might be connected." Chapter 3, The Buried Sanctuary. Eleanor arrived at the vineyard site, her face pale, but her eyes alight with a fierce determination. She stood beside Daniel, looking at the cold spot, the disturbed earth. "Julian," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "My husband, your grandfather, he always kept secrets, especially about this land." Julian, her deceased husband, Rosemary's father, a brilliant but enigmatic man, he had loved this vineyard with a passion that bordered on obsession. But in his later years, he had grown reclusive, preoccupied with ancient texts, with strange esoteric symbols. Eleanor had dismissed it as a harmless eccentricity, a scholar's retreat. Now, she wondered. They hired a small, discreet excavation team. Daniel oversaw the work, ensuring precision and minimal disturbance to the ancient vines. The soil was carefully removed, layer by layer. The cold spot deepened. The air grew heavier. Finally, after hours of painstaking work, the earth gave way to stone, a solid, ancient structure. Not a foundation, not a cellar, a crypt, a buried chamber, hidden deep beneath the earth. Not on any maps, not known to anyone. The crypt was built of rough-hewn, massive stones. Its entrance, sealed for decades, was barely discernible. With powerful tools, the team carefully opened the entrance. A rush of cool, stale air, smelling of earth and something else, something faintly sweet, almost floral, rushed out. Daniel shone his powerful flashlight into the darkness. The chamber was small, circular. The walls were covered in the same strange symbols he'd seen in the abandoned cellar. And more. Intricate patterns, celestial maps. Not of the stars as he knew them, but twisted, almost alien constellations. In the center of the crypt, on a small stone pedestal, something glinted in the flashlight beam. A dark green glass bottle. Small, elegant, sealed with a thick wax cap. Daniel felt a jolt. His breath caught in his throat. This was it. The dark green bottle. The specific vintage. The one Rosemary had described. He moved forward, Eleanor close behind him, her hands clasped to her chest. He lifted the bottle. It was heavy, cold. Its label, faded and brittle, was written in Rosemary's familiar, elegant script. The Starlight Vintage, 1984, distilled from the heart of the earth. "It's hers," Eleanor whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Oh, Rosemary, my darling girl." He carefully, slowly peeled back the wax seal. The cork, ancient and fragile, crumbled slightly. He pulled it free. No scent of wine, no aroma of grapes. He inverted the bottle. A rolled-up piece of paper, thin and brittle, slid out, yellowed with age, its edges frayed. Daniel gently unrolled it. The handwriting was Rosemary's, clear, precise, but unlike her usual sunny disposition, this letter was filled with a haunting mix of terror and profound, almost mystical acceptance. "My dearest Mama, if you are reading this, then the path has been found. The door has opened. Father, he told me it was a secret, for the vineyard, for its soul. He spoke of the gateway to abundance. He said the ancient energies of this place, the ley lines, converged here, and that I was the key, the conduit. He's been researching for years, Mama. Those strange books, those symbols. I thought it was his scholarly eccentricity, but it was a ritual, a desperate attempt to bring prosperity to the land. He believed the bitterness in the grapes was a sign, a blockage, that the land was crying out for balance. He said I was the one to help. I'm scared, Mama, so scared. He led me here, to this crypt. He drew the symbols. He chanted words I didn't understand. He held a crystal. It pulsed with light, and the earth, it began to hum, a deep, resonant vibration that shook my very bones. He told me to step into the light. He said I would pass through a shimmering veil, and that I would return, when the land spirit was renewed, when the bitterness was gone. But it wasn't a veil, Mama. It was a current, a pull. I felt myself dissolving, not in pain, but in a strange, shimmering cold. And I saw things, not of this world. Stars, but not our stars. Galaxies of pure light, and faces, ancient, beautiful. They called to me. I don't know if I can come back. I feel stretched, thin, part of something vast, something eternal. But I wanted you to know, it wasn't an accident. It wasn't a leaving. It was a journey. Please don't grieve, Mama. I'm not lost. I'm simply everywhere now. Part of the light. Part of the earth's hum. And part of the stars. Eleanor finished reading. The letter slipped from her trembling fingers. Her knees buckled. Daniel caught her, supporting her as she sank to the cold stone floor of the crypt. Tears. Not just tears. A wail. Guttural sound of profound grief and unbearable revelation. The sorrow of the earth, the map of other skies. The revelation of Rosemary's letter left them both stunned. The crypt, once a place of discovery, now felt like a tomb. A monument to Julian's desperate, misguided ambition. Eleanor slowly composed herself. Her face, streaked with tears, held a new, fragile strength. My Julian, she whispered, her voice raw. He loved this land so fiercely. He lost himself in its secrets. He believed he could make it prosperous forever. Daniel nodded, his mind reeling. The symbols on the crypt walls. The bitter grapes. It all connected. Julian's obsession. Rosemary's sacrifice. The ancient, unseen forces at play on this land. She mentioned a map, Grandma. Daniel said, his voice hushed. A map of stars. In her old telescope. The one Grandpa Julian gave her. They left the crypt, sealing it once more, its secrets now known. The sun felt strangely harsh on their skin. The vineyard, once a place of peace, now held a new, chilling significance. They went to the old observatory Julian had built for Rosemary when she was a child. A small, quaint structure on a hill overlooking the vineyard. A gift from a loving father to his curious daughter. The telescope, a beautiful antique, stood silently inside, was a roll of parchment. Delicate. Aged. He unrolled it. It was a map, not of Earth's constellations, but of swirling nebulae, of unfamiliar star clusters, of glowing pathways that stretched into impossible distances. And at the center, a series of complex, intertwined symbols. The same symbols found in the crypt. The same ones Julian had used. This is it, Daniel breathed, his voice filled with awe. Rosemary's words echoed in his mind. It shows the way back, or the way forward. He knew instinctively that this was not merely a sentimental keepsake. This was a blueprint, a key to understanding the portal, to perhaps re-establishing a connection. He noticed a small, faint inscription on the edge of the parchment, almost invisible. Only with the true guide shall the stars reveal their path. A true guide, Eleanor murmured, her eyes distant. Julian had an old astrological instrument, a brass astrolabe. He said it was passed down through generations. He believed it was a celestial compass. He used to keep it in his study, in a locked cabinet. Julian's study. Another place filled with secrets. Daniel had seen the cabinet, but dismissed it as another one of Julian's eccentricities. They returned to the main house. The study was dark, heavy with the scent of old books and faded dreams. Daniel located the locked cabinet. It was old oak, heavily carved. The lock was complex. "Grandma," he said, looking at Eleanor, "do you know where the key might be?" Eleanor thought for a moment. Then a memory surfaced. The wine key. Julian had a special antique wine key. It was a gift from his father. It had a strange, almost ornate handle. He kept it in a drawer in the kitchen. He said it opened more than just bottles. The kitchen, a more mundane place for such an important key. Daniel found it in the back of a rarely used drawer. An old, heavy brass wine key, its handle intricately carved with symbols that seemed to echo the ones on the map. He returned to the study. The key slid into the lock of the cabinet with a soft click. The heavy door swung open. Inside, nestled on a velvet cushion, was a magnificent brass astrolabe. Its surface was covered in intricate engravings, its moving parts gleaming faintly. It was a work of art and a tool. As Daniel lifted it, a faint, metallic hum resonated through the room. The air shimmered subtly. He felt a profound connection to something ancient, to the very essence of this land, and to Julian's desperate, misguided quest. The bitterness of the grapes, the sorrow of the earth. It wasn't a curse. It was an unfinished symphony, a broken connection. The astrolabe, the map, the crypt, it was all part of Julian's grand design, his attempt to heal the land, to ensure its prosperity. But at what cost? And could they, after all these years, find a way to complete it, to restore the balance, to bring Rosemary home, or at least find her peace? Chapter 5. The Unfinished Ritual. The astrolabe felt heavy in Daniel's hands. He recognized its historical significance, but now it felt imbued with a deeper, almost mystical purpose. Julian's celestial compass, the key to the stars, to Rosemary's path. He began to pore over Julian's remaining journals, now seeing them through a new lens. Julian had been researching for decades, not just about wine, about the land itself, its ancient history, its geological formations, its spiritual energies. He believed the vineyard sat on a powerful nexus of ley lines, ancient energy conduits that crisscrossed the earth. He believed that the bitterness in the grapes was a physical manifestation of a disruption in this energy, a spiritual wound. He had devised a ritual, a complex sequence of astrological alignments, earth energies, and a pure conduit, Rosemary, to open a gateway, not for personal gain, but for the prosperity of the vineyard, for the land. He believed it was his duty, his legacy. The ritual was meant to be continuous. a constant flow of energy. But Rosemary's disappearance had broken the circuit. The bitterness remained. The land remained unbalanced. Eleanor listened, her heart aching. He truly believed he was helping us, helping the vineyard. He was just misguided. Daniel, the pragmatist, found himself struggling to reconcile the scientific with the mystical. The cold spot on the thermal imaging, the hidden crypt, the portal. It defied everything he knew, but the evidence was undeniable. And Rosemary's letter, her words, they resonated with a truth that transcended logic. He discovered that the constellation map Rosemary had drawn was not arbitrary. It was a direct instruction, a sequence of movements on the astrolabe, a cosmic key. "He wanted us to complete it, Grandma," Daniel murmured, his voice hushed. "The ritual, not to bring her back necessarily, but to balance the land, to set her spirit free, to finish what he started, to heal the wound." The thought was daunting, terrifying even, but also compelling. If this land was truly connected to Rosemary, if its bitterness was her lingering echo, then healing the land might also heal her and Eleanor. They studied Julian's notes, piecing together the fragments of his mad genius, the specific moon phases, the precise alignment of the astrolabe, the focus of the energy. One night, under a sky ablaze with stars, Daniel and Eleanor went to the crypt. The air was cool, still. The symbols on the walls seemed to pulse faintly in the moonlight, filtering through the cracks. Daniel positioned the astrolabe on the stone pedestal. He carefully aligned its intricate dials, following the instructions from Rosemary's map, guided by Julian's cryptic notes. Eleanor stood beside him, her hand clutching his, her breath held tight. As the final dial clicked into place, a low hum filled the crypt. The air vibrated. A faint, ethereal glow began to emanate from the symbols on the walls, pulsing with a soft, otherworldly light. The crystal that Julian had used, still resting on the pedestal, pulsed rhythmically. Eleanor gasped. She felt it, a profound energy coursing through the crypt, through the earth, through them. "The balance," Daniel whispered, his voice full of awe. "It's restoring itself." The hum deepened, the light intensified. A shimmer appeared in the center of the crypt. Just above the pedestal, a faint, translucent veil, pulsing, like the shimmering current Rosemary had described. Eleanor reached out a trembling hand towards it. Her heart ached with longing. Could this be it? A glimpse of Rosemary? A soft, almost imperceptible warmth touched her fingertips, and then a whisper, faint, like the rustling of leaves, but undeniably Rosemary's voice. "Peace, Mama." The circle closes. The land sings. And then the light dimmed. The hum softened. The shimmer faded. The crypt returned to its cool, silent stillness. Eleanor stood there, her hands still outstretched, tears streaming down her face. But these were tears of profound relief, of acceptance, of love. Rosemary had found her peace. The ritual was complete. The land's wound was healing. Daniel, shaken but resolute, looked at his grandmother. Her face, though tear-streaked, radiated a serenity he had never seen before. Chapter 6. The Sweetness of Release. The days that followed were filled with a quiet sense of renewal. The air in the vineyard felt lighter. The oppressive weight, the invisible sorrow seemed to lift. Daniel, almost subconsciously, found himself drawn to the old Zinfandel vines. He tasted the grapes. The bitterness, it was gone, replaced by a subtle, earthy sweetness, a complex flavor, unique and profound. The land was healing. The balance was restoring. His scientific mind still grappled with the impossible, a portal, a spiritual conduit, a ritual. But he had witnessed it, felt it, the undeniable connection between the land, the family, and the cosmic forces Julian had obsessed over. His world, once so neatly defined by logic and data, had expanded. He was no longer just an enologist. He was a guardian, a steward of a profound ancient secret. He decided not to sell the land, not an inch of it. Instead, he dedicated himself to understanding it, to protecting it. He continued to study Julian's journals, not just as historical documents, but as guides. He believed there were more secrets to uncover, more layers to the gateway to abundance. Perhaps not for opening portals, but for understanding the deep spiritual connection between humanity and the earth. Eleanor, truly at peace for the first time in decades, spent her days walking the vineyard. Her grief for Rosemary remained, a tender ache, but it was no longer a consuming void. It was a memory, infused with understanding and a profound sense of connection. Her daughter was not lost. She was part of the land, part of the stars, part of the eternal hum of the universe. She often sat by Rosemary's old telescope, looking up at the night sky. The stars seemed brighter now, more meaningful. They were not just distant lights. They were pathways. They were echoes. And sometimes in the quiet of the night, she would feel Rosemary's presence, a gentle warmth, a whisper on the wind. "Peace, Mama." The vineyard began to flourish. The old Zinfandel vines, once producing only bitterness, now yielded a wine of extraordinary depth and character. Daniel, now truly an enologist with a difference, started a new line of wine from those grapes. He called it the Echo Vintage, a tribute to Rosemary, to Julian, to the enduring mystery of the land. The story of the Vance family, of the lost daughter and the obsessed father, became a whispered legend in Napa Valley. A tale of love, loss, and the profound, mystical connection between earth and sky. Eleanor, the matriarch, watched over it all. Her wisdom, once tinged with sorrow, now shone with a quiet, radiant light. She had found her daughter, not in the way she had hoped, not a physical reunion, but a deeper, more profound connection, a spiritual understanding that transcended time and space. The bitter harvest had ended, and in its place bloomed the sweetness of release, the sweetness of eternal love, the sweetness of knowing